Evening.
Ingraham Live,
The debut, Laura Ingraham Live,
all the success.
the Ingraham
Thanks so
angle,
much,
and I'm
Sean.
so
Really
proud of you and
appreciate it.
happy for you. Wish you all the success.
Thanks so much, Sean. Really appreciate it. And welcome everyone to the debut of the Ingraham angle. We're going to dive in today's indictments and implications for the Trump administration, and of course, our exclusive interview with White House Chief of Staff John Kelly shortly. But first, the angle. I want to start by posing a basic question. The one that Sinatra asked in that old song, "What is America to me?" It's a question that gets lost in the constant infighting that consumes us here in Washington. Ronald Reagan said that the American dream is not that every man must be level with every other man. The American dream is that every man must be free to become whatever God intends he should become. But over the past few decades, the government became an obstacle to people realizing that dream. Look, politics is supposed to be a career devoted to public service, protecting our life, our liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But for too long, it was dominated by special interests, big business, and of course, the media elites. The politicians were supposed to be helping you. Instead, they helped themselves. They were elected to run the government, not to run you over with it. Millions of Americans voted for Trump because they had had enough. They were tired of being bullied by politicians and the so-called experts who gave us endless wars, saddled us with $20 trillion in debt, and left us with a border more wide open than Harvey Weinstein's robe. They were tired of the ruling bipartisan elites in Washington, and a media establishment that didn't just cover them, but covered for them. Day to day, what do most of you worry about? Paying the bills, sending your kids to a decent school, your health care, maybe saving something for retirement? Most of us, I think, want three things: liberty, prosperity, safety, liberty, and that includes preserving our history. So far, despite the endless negative reporting, we the people are doing pretty well under Trump. The economy is soaring, unemployment is down, the trade deficit is down. Trump is renegotiating NAFTA and other unfair and outdated trade deals. He's reformed the VA. He's appointed incredible judges to the federal bench, more coming this week, and of course Justice Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. He's enforcing the border, novel concept, and deporting violent criminals. Who doesn't want that? So what are Trump's opponents resisting again? Is losing power. I'll tell you. What they're really resisting is losing power. The people took their power back on Election Day, and the establishment is mad as hell. Let's face it, they really don't like the American people, not very much at least, or their forefathers. There's a self-loathing in the air. Do you feel it? Forces hell-bent on erasing our historical memory. Literature. American monuments, works of art, literature, the remembrances of men and women who imperfectly made their mark on the American experiment are being ripped from the classrooms and the public square. The memory and works of Washington, Jefferson, General Lee, heck, even Harper Lee, are being sacrificed on the high altar of political correctness. What kind of country are we leaving our children? We owe future generations the opportunity to understand the glories and, yes, the sins of the people who made these United States of America. Our children have a right to be fully informed, a right to a complete record of what went before, and yes, the chance to ask themselves in time, what is America to me? In George Washington's farewell address, written with Alexander Hamilton, he said, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness, these firmest props of the duties of men and citizens, what we believe. Our love of God, family, and country. These aren't trite relics of the past, but are at the very core of who we are as Americans. And certainly this show is going to be about all of this. And certainly the political, the legal, and the cultural battles of the day. But something more. That of your families. How all of that affects your life and that of your families. I take all of this very personally. I'm doing this because I care about what happens to this country, to our children, and our children's children. Now, there'll be times when you disagree with me, and sometimes vehemently so, and I'm sure you're going to let me know. But all I'll say is that I'm going to call it as I see it, as I've done for the past 20 years, and I'm going to get answers for you, and I'm going to hold the powerful accountable, and that includes you, Mr. President. And every night with you, we'll continue to answer this question. Now, as promised, what is America to me, to all of us? Now, as promised, my exclusive interview with White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly. We began with the indictments announced in the special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe today. Let's start with the news today. General Kelly, thanks for being with us. Let's start with the news today. These indictments were handed down. Paul Manafort, of course, his associate, Mr. Gates, and another minor aide to the Trump administration, George Papadopoulos. What's the administration's reaction? I saw a tweet early this morning, but what's the reaction?
Well, I would offer to you, first of all, Laura, my job is such that I am completely consumed between 600 in the morning and whenever I get home at night, which is usually pretty late. I'm not in a position to watch very much on the TV. I know that the gentlemen were indicted today. All of the activities, as I understand it, that they were indicted for was long before they ever met Donald Trump or had any association with the campaign. But I think the reaction of the administration is let the legal justice system work. Everyone's innocent till presumed innocent, and we'll see where it goes.
With being chief of staff as you are now 3 months in, is this a difficult moment for the staff, or is staff worried when indictments start being handed down that this is just the first, second, third shoe to drop, but there'll be many more to follow?
No, I think the staff is very comfortable with simply serving the nation. The vast majority of the staff would have nothing to do with any of this kind of thing. So there's no worry about it. Everyone is just doing the things that they were hired to do to serve the nation.
I think the president has made it clear what he thinks about the Uranium One story and the Fusion GPS story. But what do you think? Do you think there should be a special counsel appointed to investigate all of these narratives coming out with the DNC and the Clinton campaign actually funding research that was in part compiled by the Kremlin? Kremlin associates.
Well, I'm one of those people that think the American people really do have a right to know what their government does, have a right to know what their government is doing on any given day, and by the same token, what private citizens are doing if they break the law. Again, everyone's presumed innocent, but I think with the focus of that's been on Mr. Trump and the focus that's been on this Russian collusion, which of course is not the case at all with Mr. Trump. We're very, very confident that these kind of accusations, unfortunately, the U.S. population outside of the echo chamber that is Washington essentially could care less about Washington, D.C. If you go out there into the hinterlands, people don't care. They're disgusted. If you look at the rates of acceptance among the U.S. population, the U.S. Congress, the media is all way down in the single digits or in the teens. Most people in America look at Washington with amusement, but not with an awful lot of respect or interest. So I think it's doubly important that when these kind of accusations are made, that they should be investigated.
Is there any sense that Bob Mueller, who was heading the FBI at a time when this was being approved, the Uranium One, that he should recuse himself from any such investigation of this?
I think Mr. Mueller right now is pretty busy doing what he's doing. I think this whole...
So should there be another special
I guess so. I mean, again, not a lawyer. One of the strengths I have in looking at issues in my job, I think probably as a layman looking at this kind of thing, we need to find someone who's very, very objective, who can get to the bottom of these accusations. I think it's important. Again, the American people have an absolute right to know these things, unless things are classified. This administration certainly, you saw Mr. Trump do this the other day when he demanded recommended that the JFK documents be released in their entirety with very, very, very few redactions, but nothing held back. And that's where he is on this, and certainly that's where I am on this.
You guys hope this wraps up soon with Mueller? Should it wrap up soon?
I mean, it should wrap up soon. I mean, it would seem that they're towards the end of the witness pile, and I don't know how much longer it could possibly go on, but we're in great hopes that it wraps up. It is very distracting to the president, as it would be to any citizen, to be investigated for something while at the same time trying to carry the weight of what being president of the United States means on his shoulder.
How much time does this take up for him?
Well, you know, he and I have, as you might imagine, multiple conversations a day. Generally in the morning when we first talk, it'll be about these kind of things, just general conversation before we get down to business. But it is very distracting for him.
You have a big trip to Asia coming up this week. We heard about the previous administration was supposed to pivot to Asia. We never really saw it. What's the administration's goal on this trip?
Well, just to, I mean, first of all, he has great relationships with the leadership in South Korea, Japan, and China. And then, of course, a commitment to that region of the world to be involved. So he's going to build on those relationships, and of course we'll do two conferences, one in Vietnam and and we'll go to Hanoi to touch base with the national leadership there, and then go to the Philippines, where he'll meet for conferences, but where he'll meet the president of the Philippines. All of this is just to solidify relationships that are already pretty positive in my view.
Japan wants a nuclear language from the United States. If North Korea should launch an attack on Japan, they want to feel like there will be a strike by the United States. Are you guys going to give them that language that they want?
There's commitments in place for us to help.
Overwhelming force is not necessarily saying a nuclear response.
That's exactly right. But what we really hope, what I should say, what the president really hopes, and we all men and women of goodwill feel this way, is that the leadership, such as it is in North Korea, come to their senses, and with the help of countries like China, decide to denuclearize, give up their atomic weapons. There's no reason for them. There's sort of no purpose for that country. Just destabilizes a number of relationships, and obviously an ICBM program. There's absolutely no reason. But I don't think we can have a country like North Korea have a ICBM that can deliver a nuclear, now a thermonuclear device on the mainland of the United States. They already have the capability to at least reach with missiles to the great American citizens that live in Guam.
Congressman Trent Franks talked about the possibility of North Korea, with its hydrogen bomb capabilities, ultimately being able to explode an EMP over the middle of the country, electromagnetic pulse bomb. And you play that out, that could ultimately lead to the death of like 90% of the country. Cars don't work, computers don't work, nothing works without the computer any longer. What about that? I mean, that's a scenario that's, like, Newt Gingrich wrote a novel about that, but that is the kind of thing that I think about keeping you up at night, because when I started reading about that really is terrifying.
And that's why he cannot have a ICBM that can deliver a survivable nuclear device to the homeland. But they're coming close, Laura, and I just don't think
it kept you up at night. You said this was the issue that kept you up at night more than any other issue. Is it still?
It certainly still is, because it's such a destabilizing. But the great hope we all have, and they're already doing this, is that the Chinese exert their pressure. They're already observing the sanctions. We know that, to exert pressure on the leadership in North Korea, and we have great hopes for the Russians as well.
President Xi was just re-elected. He's being compared now to Chairman Mao. He's of that stature in China. The president tweeted out a comment basically congratulating President Xi on this historic victory. I'm paraphrasing. But Mao killed like 60 million people. Like, it's a communist country. Why are we kind of celebrating Xi's presidency? Is because we need them? We need their help? Move in the North Korea problem?
Again, as Americans, we can't conceive of accepting a government like that, such as it is. But that is not us to pass judgment on. I think working with people, no matter who they are, is better than not talking to them. They have a system of government that is apparently works for the Chinese people, and
not all of them.
Well, not all of them.
There's a lot of Christians it doesn't work for.
But let's hope that this is a new kind of leader, and and not look back so many decades.
What's our relationship with China? Are they friend, foe, trading partner? How would you describe
Well, they beat us pretty badly in terms of trade. That doesn't make them an enemy. They are, to say the least, a world power. That doesn't make them an enemy. They're probably in many ways have been smarter than we are in terms of business and trade. President Trump is committed to changing that relationship on a collegial basis. The disparity between what we buy and sell from them is very great, but by no means are they, I wouldn't even consider them competitors necessarily, just simply another world power.
They have a $360 billion trade.
I think it's closer to 5. But whose fault is that? I mean, that's our fault.
Yeah, well, they're doing what's good for them.
My hat's off to them for taking advantage of whatever they've been able to take advantage of to have that trade relationship. This president is committed to changing that relationship, but to do it in a collegial way.
We have an acting assistant secretary for Central and South Asian Affairs at State. We still do not have a permanent assistant secretary. In other words, it's a career diplomat, no offense to Alicia Wells, but it's not Trump's pick. Why is that? Why is a snail's pace of getting people nominated and approved?
The names have been put forward in most cases. I think and the president was making this case last week when he had lunch with the Republican caucus on the Senate side. We are, if you compare where this administration is relative to the Obama administration, we are way, way behind. Maybe half the number of those confirmed. And even under the last Bush administration, we're way behind. The Senate Democratic leadership has been very, very effective in slowing things down to a snail's pace.
Has the Secretary of State slowed things down at State Department? The reports are that there's a bit of a divide there, that some of the names that the president wanted have been rejected, and that means then we don't have these key positions filled.
I would tell you that there's an awful lot of incredible vetting that goes on. So when before you're nominated to take a position, or even before the president considers you, and before the secretary considers you, there's a tremendous amount of vetting that goes on, and frankly, a lot of people have complicated finances and have complicated lives.
Those positions are going to be filled.
They will definitely be filled.
At one point, you were reported to say that on the refugee question, you'd like between 0 and 1 refugees coming into the country. Now, the president said 45,000 refugees. Traditionally, it's been about 20,000 a year, overwhelmingly from the Middle East. They're Islamic, very few Christians still coming in. What's happening there, and why that number is so large, given what you advocated and what the President Trump campaign?
I don't ever remember. I read that. Actually, my wife told me.
Oh, your wife did. She's always right, by the way.
I don't ever remember saying between 0 and 1. My time at DHS was definitely we should not take refugees into the country unless we know who they are. And consequently, we've improved the vetting process. The vetting process to date, although it's lengthy, 2 years, the vast majority of it is a 2-year wait to come to the country. The point is that we're down from 110, 45,000. One of the things that always does astound me about the refugee question is there's about 65 million people who are, I think by UN numbers, a large number anyways, that are technically refugees, and only a tiny fraction of that can be brought to the United States or to Western Europe or to Australia. It just seems to me, and most people I think that are, if they think about the refugee issue, it's theoretically a temporary problem. Best thing to do is to house them as close to their countries as possible, and to help solve the problems inside the country, like we have, say, in Syria.
So you're satisfied with 45,000?
Yeah, I think that's a good number.
And is extreme vetting?
But I don't know where this 0 to 1 ever came from.
Okay, now how are we extreme vetting? What is extreme vetting?
Extreme vetting is we simply interview people and have to satify ourselves that the person we're talking to is indeed the person who they claim.
It's pretty tough to do in some cases. There are no records.
And frankly, impossible to do in some cases.
So they won't come in then. If you can't really verify that, they're not coming in.
If we can't verify, I don't think we should let them into the country.
Much more. My interview with General Kelly in a moment, including his intense public feud with Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson.
Something like this, actually. I will apologize if I need to, but for something like this.
Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. My interview with White House Chief of Staff John Kelly continues. He addresses some recent controversies, including the removal of historic monuments and his dispute with Democratic Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. Let's move on to the Frederica Wilson issue when she overheard the conversation.
Oh, the Congresswoman.
Yeah, the Congresswoman. She overheard the conversation of the Gold Star widow. And this blew up into a huge controversy. You came out into the press room and you gave what was, by all accounts, a riveting account of your reaction to this. At the time, you said you were so upset you went to Arlington National Cemetery. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Why did you go to Arlington, and what did you do there? What did you hear?
I was stunned, Laura. Of all of the things I thought that were left in terms of things that we hold up as special in our country, and most of them have gone by the wayside. I think I mentioned some of them, to include our flag and our anthem. Those are all passé, I guess. But the one thing I thought was sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice to the nation and the families that bear that hurt. And to have seen the president make a phone call and did the best he could, standing right next to him. She was on speakerphone. But to hear him talk to four next to kin that day, and essentially the message was the same. And he did the best he could to make it personal, and the best he could to make them understand how sorry he was as the president and as a father himself. And then to see what came of that just was stunning to me. You know, I made reference to an appearance that the Congresswoman made, you know,
2015.
Yeah, and you know, a number of people that were there after she said what she said about me were volunteered to come forward because they saw her both before and after her official comments. I said, no, let's not do this. These are FBI agents, former FBI agents that were there. That part of it we should let go. What did I hear over in Arlington Cemetery? Some of the stones over there represent young people that I sent out into battle and they died. Not to make it more melodramatic than it is, but my wondering was, is any of this worth it anymore?
Meaning working in the White House,
or doing anything for the, you know, is it worth it anymore? If someone can make political hay out of something that the president was trying to do, and of course the screams, and a lot of you viewers will laugh at this, I'm sure, but the screams out of the graves was, you know, what are you talking about, Kelly? You know, you got it easy. Look where we are. It's worth it. It's worth it to fight for America. And the good news is, I think, outside of this cesspool or swamp or whatever it's called, where Americans are just doing the best they can, working hard, raising their family, paying their taxes, hoping to send their kids off to college someday. That makes it all worthwhile. But it was absolutely depressing to me to see how that was turned into a political event. I just don't know how anyone could possibly criticize another human being for doing the best he or she could do to express sorrow from the bottom of their hearts. It was stunning to me.
The widow of LaDavid Johnson basically corroborated what the Congresswoman recounted about the conversation. So that was her reaction. There's also comments that Frederica Wilson in her speech did not brag about getting funding, as you indicated in your remarks. I actually watched Frederica Wilson's speech, and she certainly used the word I a lot in talking about how, and I think we actually have a clip of it.
I said, I'm a school principal. And I said, excuse my French. Oh, hell no. We're going to get this done. I went to an attack mode. I presented it. We all voted, and I dashed it over to the Senate and put our senators on notice. And guess what? The president signed the bill into law this past Tuesday, April 7th, 2015, with a bang, bang, bang.
Well, I'll go back and talk about before her comments and at the reception afterwards. Again, it was a package deal. Don't want to get into it. As far as the young widow goes, she has every right to say what she wants to say. But it's the politicalization of something that was so from the heart.
But do you feel like you have something to apologize?
Do I?
Yeah.
Oh, no. No, never. Well, I'll apologize if I need to, but for something like this, absolutely not. I stand by my comments.
What do you pray for?
I pray for world peace. I pray for our society that seems to be so broken right now and against itself. I pray for my family. I pray for my son and all the fallen. I pray for a lot.
A prominent church in Alexandria, Virginia, where George Washington worshipped. It's historic, of course, in Robert E. Lee.
I think I saw this yesterday.
They decided to pull the plaques memorializing both George Washington and Robert E. Lee because they want the church to be inclusive and be considered more tolerant. What is your reaction to that type of attempt to pull down little markers of history?
Well, history's history, and there's certain things in history that were not so good, and other things that were very, very good. I think we make a mistake, though, and as a society, and certainly as individuals, when we take what is today accepted as right and wrong, and go back 100, 200, 300 years. Or more, and say what what Christopher Columbus did was wrong. 500 years later, it's inconceivable to me that you would take what we think now and apply it back then. I think it's just very, very dangerous, and it shows you how much of a lack of appreciation of history and what history is. I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. To compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand.
They'll be pulling down the Washington Monument at some point. What are they going to rename it, General? We're running out of names.
No, we can find some cult hero that we can put up there and say, well, he really was the great one. Andy Warhol or someone like that. But yeah.
Congressional never-Trumpers, and you know who they are: Jeff Flake, John McCain. They're resisting the Trump agenda, a lot of it at least. How do you, as a White House, deal with that? Keep all wings of the Republican Party together? Is it possible to make so everybody feels like they're getting a say in this process, so they don't feel left out?
Yeah, as I say, he talks directly to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the Hill, on a regular basis. Doesn't hesitate to pick up the phone and call a Democrat and get their sense of.
Who does he call most? Schumer? Is it Schumer's?
Well, I mean, Mr. Schumer certainly. He's interacted with people like Ms. McCaskill and invites them sometimes to go on trips. Mr. Donnelly from Indiana went on a trip out to his home state. So he doesn't hesitate to call. He has learned, I don't think he'll ever accept, that politics sometimes trumps what's good for America. We're doing the tax cut debate, not debate, but the House and the Senate are developing their plans.
Doesn't he have to get engaged, though? He didn't get that engaged on Obamacare, and that went down the tubes.
He's very engaged, and I think what we're about to see is the agents of the swamp are going to start. They're already amassing to stop some of the things that the House, Senate bills have in them, what the president wants. And he's going to take them on, and he's going to take this thing down to the wire. But he wants to is working with the Congress, both sides of the Hill, and I think there's going to be a great tax cut come out of this. But if there isn't, it won't be because.
Is there an if?
No, I don't think there is an if. That's a great point. He will fight tooth and nail to get what he believes is right for the American people relative to a tax cut and to stimulate our economy.
One final question. Halloween. If you could be one character, just one, dress up as someone, General.
Infantryman.
Who would it be?
Oh, a Marine sergeant.
Good man.
Infantryman.
Appreciate it. Good man.
Yeah.
Good man. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Hope it went well.
What you really need to know about the Mueller
And up next, what you really need to know about the Mueller indictments. We'll be joined by former U.S. Attorney General Mike Mukasey and a former senior counsel on Ken Starr's Clinton investigation. At the top of the show, today, special counsel Robert Mueller, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and his longtime associate Richard Gates were each indicted on 12 counts that included money laundering, tax fraud, and making false statements. Almost all of their alleged illegal activity occurred before the 2016 election got into full swing, and the indictment makes no mention of the Trump campaign. Here's how the White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders responded.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. We've been saying from day one there's been no evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, and nothing in the indictment today changes that at all.
There was one potentially troublesome announcement by Mueller, a low-level foreign policy volunteer to the Trump campaign. His name is George Papadopoulos, pled guilty to lying to federal agents about his contact with a Russian national. Joining us now for reaction in New York, former U.S. Attorney General Mike Mukasey, and here in Washington, Paul Rosenzweig, a former counsel for, of course, Ken Starr's Clinton investigation. Gentlemen, it's great to see both of you. Let's start with Judge Mukasey. Judge, take it away. You saw the indictments and the agreement, the plea deal that Papadopoulos agreed to. He pled to lying to federal agents. What's your take?
I did. The first thing I have to comment on, because of the contrast between the segment that you just broadcast and what we're going to be talking about now, is that the contrast between somebody like General Kelly and some of the pygmies that we're going to be talking about now, between his sense of history, his personal sacrifice, and what they're doing couldn't be greater. And you're stressing the importance of thinking about what the country means. At the beginning of your show is going to be in stark relief when somebody draws a contrast between these two segments. That said, these indictments were, in a way, revealing in a sense, of how small some of the beer is. The Manafort indictment, of course, was of activity that began well before the campaign, activity in which he and his co-defendant apparently were involved, and as you've pointed out, didn't deal directly, didn't deal indeed at all with what is supposed to be the central concern of the special counsel, that is the question of whether there was or wasn't collusion, which in and of itself is not a crime, but in any event, that's supposed to be the focus of his activity. So far as the Papadopoulos charge, to which he pleaded guilty, that was of making false statements about the timing of his contact with some Russian officials, and or people who said they were Russian officials. And what's most striking about the recitation of facts there is how he was apparently trying to arrange contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and wasn't getting anywhere. And in the end, no meetings were held. In the end, no information was exchanged. In the end, the emails that were dangled in front of him, the same way they were dangled in front of Trump Jr., were never produced. The only emails, of course, that we heard about were emails that were hacked from the Democratic National Committee, not emails from Hillary Clinton's server.
All right, so Papadopoulos, though, could be a real problem. And why? Or he's a volunteer capacity? Was he trying to get in big with the larger campaign structure? They reference a couple of different campaign supervisors. They're calling him a cooperating witness of some sort.
Yeah, well, I think it's premature to characterize Mr. Papadopoulos as small beer. I think it is not yet clear exactly the extent of what he has told the special counsel. Clearly, he has named at least two more senior Trump advisors in the campaign as participants in his discussions. And as you pointed out, I thought the most notable thing about the entire Papadopoulos episode was that in his original appearance back in July, the government sought to keep his arrest sealed because of his proactive cooperation with the.
Gave many interviews. He gave many interviews.
Well, yeah, proactive cooperation suggests more than interviews. It suggests that he might have actually been an active participant in the investigation, either through emails or through wiring. I don't know that, but proactive does not mean reactive interviews. It means some kind of affirmative assistance to the.
So there could have been a wire placed on Papadopoulos. He could have called some of these people who have since been identified by other media outlets, Corey Lewandowski, Sam Clovis. Again, I'm not saying anyone did anything wrong, but they were named as the unnamed campaign supervisors.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if he made calls.
Judge, what happens ultimately here with this investigation? If you had to game it out now, it's impossible to say this. They have a limitless budget.
Can't game it out. You can't game it out. The one thing I would point out is that if he was proactive in the way that's just been suggested, one hopes that he was kept under pretty tight control about who he had conversations with, because during that investigation, some of those people were represented by counsel, and if he had conversations with people who were represented by counsel, that's going to trip people up in a very big way.
Do you think there's a special counsel who will be appointed in these other Russia scandals, which we're going to get to next block, either with Uranium One or this Fusion GPS? Special counsel on the special counsel.
I think that's one special counsel too many.
Yeah, too many.
Maybe two.
The whole statute. I'm sorry, I think the whole statute's unconstitutional, but that's just me. I'm with Bork, who is it Judge Bork who believes that. Judge Mukasey and Mr. Rosenzweig, we're so great to see both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And up next, Congressman Devin Nunes joins us live. Is there more evidence that Hillary Clinton's campaign is the big culprit over Russian collusion? Coming up.